Hey everybody, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and join us today. My name is Craig from OneFix, and I am very grateful to be joined today by Alex Sampson from New Dawn Risk. You'll see both of us on camera. We're going to be covering quite an interesting topic today. It's a little bit around hacking, so the title is "If we get hacked tomorrow, what happens next?" But kind of the angle on this is a little bit about kind of helping educate you as companies and end users around what a breach might look like, how this might feel for your staff, but then also I think very importantly how that kind of ties along to what you should do next. And Alex is joining us from New Dawn Risk. I'll let him introduce himself in a minute, but his angle, you'll find out, there's no surprise. He's here on kind of his expertise is in insurance, but actually he was previously an MSP, so he's been in the same kind of seat that we're in here in terms of IT. So he's kind of uniquely positioned to understand, I guess, the risks and also how that what that looks like. So we're going to we thought we'd keep this fairly informal today. We'd have it almost like a conversational style. I think there's hopefully some value there for you in terms of Alex and I talking and just talking through what these things look like. So I've introed myself, Alex. I'll stop talking for a minute and I'll let you do your proper pitch intro, because you'll do it way better than I will. So.
No, not at all, Craig. Not at all. And I appreciate the warm words there, and great to be on a session like today, because I appreciate cyber insurance tends to be a little bit of a hot topic, doesn't it? And so it's very much, I guess, about revealing what's behind the curtain, kind of understanding what a policy does entail, because I know a lot of the time when you do look to purchase a policy, it could be for obviously various reasons. Maybe there's been a potential breach or something in the sector recently, much as we've seen in the course of sort of last year with Jaguar Land Rover and things like that. Or it could be for procurement reasons. So obviously, before you go ahead and you launch and make that purchase, it's always good to know what it does entail. So we'll obviously be diving into a little bit of that today. So Craig's alluded to a little bit about my background there. So I come from cyber. I used to work in a managed service provider, worked there for a number of years, and then I decided to join the dark side and became one of the sort of insurance people. I very much sort of clung to my laurels in the sense that all I do at New Dawn Risk is cybersecurity. A bit about us. We were founded in 2005, so been around for a fair bit of time. And we are a proper Lloyd's broker. And what that basically means is that we have access to the whole sort of London market, and we can place risks globally. So with cyber in particular, obviously every sort of environment's completely different. And so we just have that ability to kind of work within all sorts of different environments there, and risk is very much our game. So we are very much a specialist in terms of what we do. And I think as much as Craig and the work which the OneFix team does in terms of having that client first approach and the ability to kind of help you work your way through your cyber hygiene, we work in a very similar way, very hands-on approach with customers, kind of guiding them through what they probably should have or shouldn't have in a policy, and just making those recommendations really. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. I'll hand back over to you, Craig, and I guess we can kind of go from here in terms of kicking it all off.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. So yeah, I thought so we'll keep this fairly conversational. I thought maybe for the first few 5-10 minutes or so we could just talk through kind of what a breach kind of looks like and feels like, because I think it's really important that a lot of end users don't necessarily know what a breach could look like, but also what they should or shouldn't do. And I think my experience, the reason I thought this was a useful thing to kind of talk about was from a conversation with yourself and also with a few other people who've been through these scenarios where they've actually had the cyber insurance in place, is actually there's a point where actually you need to know when to kind of stop and call the insurance company, and but also you don't necessarily potentially want to call them for everything. So I guess maybe I'll talk through a bit of an example of some of the way that I've seen breaches happen, and then Alex, maybe we'll chip over to you and you can kind of give us some feedback as to how that looks from your side and your experiences, how that works with insurance. So we are still seeing a huge amount of obviously attacks on SMEs and SMBs. I think there's a real common misconception that there's this thing of I'm too small to be hacked. And the reality is actually, in the current climate and the way things work, people aren't probably specifically targeting you anyway. What's happening is that these are, mass attacks, spray and pray. People are just firing out these kind of different routes to try and get into any business. And once they get a bite and they get a hook, then they're in, and then they go and find what they can find to either sell or extort or any private data. So they're not, you may be running a small business with 5, 10 people and you think, well, I haven't really got anything that's that important. But your systems probably are, and your systems that you need to deliver outputs to your customers certainly are. And you may well have private information and private data, or you may have financial records and that kind of stuff. So everybody's got something of value, and data is incredibly valuable. So, don't think that they're going to be targeting you. They are just spraying and praying. And we see most of these attacks coming through against the human in some way, shape, or form, because the human is normally the weak link in the chain, and that predominantly is still phishing attacks. Even today, we still see the vast amount of attacks kind of kicking off from a phish and someone kind of getting their credentials breached. But we also commonly see attacks happening through password reuse, and we've had a prior webinar about that, and why password hygiene is very important, because using that same password across multiple places means that you might get it breached somewhere and then you're getting hacked somewhere else. But also commonly, and again this ties back to Alex's thing about Jaguar Land Rover, it's happening, and it's attacks against business processes. And in those instances, it was attacks against the actual service provider like ourselves, where people were pretending to be an end user and managing to get credentials reset and getting past kind of the security checkpoints and getting kind of the keys to the kingdom. But we see a lot where people will be sent, bank detail changes or fake, fraudulent invoices, and if they don't have processes and checks and balances in place to kind of spot that, they go and send money to somebody they shouldn't, or they provide access to somebody they shouldn't, and again that's the start of a breach waiting to happen. So I guess my key takeaway on this point, and then I'll pass to Alex, is around the fact that I think the signs can be very small. A breach could be something as patently obvious as all of your machines being locked out and shut down. That's very obvious and clear. But actually, more often than not, it can just be that somebody's email, you suddenly start seeing some weird emails coming out from your email address, or you're getting bounce backs, or you're getting messages from customers saying, well, have you sent me this email? So my takeaway there is it can be small, and I think you should never be afraid to raise your hand as a regardless of who you are in the organization, whether you're right at the bottom, right at the top. The culture should be that those anything that seems strange or out of the ordinary should be reported, either to whatever your reporting route is, whether that's your ISP, your MSP, your service provider like ourselves, or whether that's to your senior leadership team or management. It's really important to breed an internal security culture that says something's a bit weird. I just want to report this because I think it looks strange. What are your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of echo what you're saying there, Craig, I think it's very much the same. You look at statistics over time, and fortunately in the UK, physical crime has just gone down and down and down, but it almost seems like it's now been supplemented with the use of online crime. And so when we look at what these hackers are doing at the moment, not only are they becoming more sophisticated as time goes on, but it's also more accessible as well, right? Because when you look at the uses of sort of AI and things like that, very much before it was something where someone had to be rather clued up when it came to hacking or building some of these attacks. And so now they're able to rattle off and create these sophisticated sort of ability to breach quite quickly, but then also put something together which is rather nasty. So when you look at the impact and the damage which is caused, I think to kind of follow on from what you said there, Craig, is if you suggest or have a slight sort of inkling that something is wrong, not only would I say it's very, very important to obviously reach out to your MSP, who is trusted to kind of work very closely with you and make sure that you have quite a robust level of cyber in place. But at the same time, the insurance is very much there to be used. And so from an insurer's point of view, they actually want you to obviously, contact them if something does happen, because every second or minute that goes by, the severity of the damage which is caused once they're within your environment takes its toll. And so ultimately, insurers, that's their money, right? So, you're basically looking to kind of claim on a policy, and if that's gone on for a fair bit of time, it cascades into a much larger claim, and ultimately that's the insurer's money as well, right? So from their perspective, they're very keen for you to get involved with them as soon as possible, and it's very much something where if you have a slight inkling, definitely call the hotline. get involved with the insurers. And it's not something where you necessarily have to claim either. So you could call them up, just say, look, I suspect that there's something which is untoward, something which isn't quite right in my environment. And would you be able to kind of have a quick check for me? So even if it's something where you're not fully claiming on your policy, but you just want them to kind of suss things out. Again, you're not having to take it to a full-blown claim, but it's just making sure that you have the ability to plug the hole as quickly as possible. Because, like we saw with Jaguar Land Rover, when it comes to SME level and things like that, if a bad breach does happen, it could mean the difference between the business completely going under or, having that resilience and being able to continue to trade business as usual. So I would say always to get involved with your insurer if something does happen. And we can obviously talk a little bit more about this, Craig, but in terms of how that process looks, it's very, very straightforward as well. And we obviously, as the broker, want to make sure that you truly understand it because although on the surface of it, cyber insurance might be a little bit of an intimidating thing to take on, especially if you haven't got your own sort of dedicated IT department, or maybe you're not the most technical person. But that's what the beauty of it is, the ability to not only have the financial indemnity, but also a collection of respected experts within their individual fields, which is all, as I say, pushed and combined into one cyber insurance policy, and it's all at your disposal. So all we have to do is call up that line, and you have access to them.
Well, I think that's a really useful point because to take that forward, obviously some of us in the room will have cyber insurance, some people may not. For those that do, I suspect most of them have never had to claim or have never thought about claiming. So, maybe we can in a second demystify that claims process. But I just want to just pivot back to one of your prior points. And before I do that, actually, I'm just going to say there is a Q&A button, everybody. So in Teams, up the top, Q&A, stick questions in there for myself or Alex, probably more for Alex because he's got way more knowledge than I have. But to pivot back to your point around that kind of claim, give them a call and ask the question. As a skeptic, I'm going to say, is that not going to prejudice my insurance? Are they not going to look at me and go, well, he keeps phoning up and saying he thinks these things are happening, what's going on there? We're going to have to put the price up, or we're going to have to process this as a claim. So we're always kind of, I guess we're almost conditioned that we don't want to claim on insurance because we always expect it's just going to bump the premiums. And I'm sure if we had a big claim, it would do. But can people make that kind of initial contact without worrying that they're going to trigger off something that's suddenly going to cost them a huge amount of money if it was a false alarm?
Absolutely, and this is it, right? Because just to kind of vanquish that worry there, I think, if anything, we want you to be hassling the insurer, and the reason I say that is because it won't affect your premium. Premium is basically worked out in terms of a formula, right? And it covers various different areas such as the revenue of the business, how many dedicated personnel there are within a company, what industry you work in, because unfortunately there are some industries which are more heavily targeted than others. Also things like the amount of dedicated sort of sensitive records which you hold, because obviously if those get leaked, there's also all sorts of GDPR fines and things like that. So and then at a real sort of base level as well, making sure that you do have some pretty basic tools in place to make sure that the likelihood of a breach doesn't happen, but then also it's not in your environment for too long. So those are the things would be predetermined in terms of what your policy will look like. And then obviously when you go to fill out that form to get the insurance in the first place, typically there'll always be a section on there, a question which is asked in terms of have you had a breach in the last however many years? But there's no question for how many times have you called up the line to check to make sure that you're okay. So you could call that line and it shouldn't, as I say, have any bearing whatsoever on the premium which you pay. And I guess in a similar light as well, much to maybe something like property or something like that, the market does go through its ups and downs in terms of premiums being more expensive and cheaper, and that's just based off, I guess, the wide picture view in terms of what insurers see in terms of the amount of claims happening and how severe they are. So fortunately enough, we are currently in a softer market. Softer means premiums are naturally lower. But I think with the impending use of AI and things like that, the market can only be swing one way for too long. So I think in terms of the forecast, what we're due to see, I think we're starting to see premiums potentially rise in the next couple of years. But then also the bar to entry might potentially be a little bit higher as well. And what I mean by that is it may not just be getting your classic multi-factor authentication in place and some backups. Insurers may look to sort of say we might want, something else in the form of maybe penetration test more regularly, or maybe some other areas as well. But obviously, it all feeds into your premium. But being able to call up the line and make sure that if you do suspect something is wrong, it doesn't have any bearing. So that hopefully answers your question there, Craig.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks, Alex. So to take that then forward to the next step, so almost kind of role playing that I'm working for somebody. I think I've had a breach. There's some weird things happening. I'm seeing my machine's popped up a message says you've been encrypted or you've been infected. I call up my cyber insurer. Talk me through what's going to happen. I have no idea. What's the next steps? What does that feel
Yeah.
like?
So because obviously when an attack happens, psychologically it's a very tumultuous event, isn't it? So it's something where people tend to go into sort of headless chicken mode. They aren't sure what to do. And obviously with my background, previously working in a managed service provider, I've seen very, very experienced people in my time who, been in the industry for a long time, CISOs, CIOs, and they're people who also make wrong decisions. So I think once, the adrenaline kicks in and all sorts of things happen. People sometimes make the wrong decisions, don't they? So I think the way that insurers have sort of looked at things, they've tried to simplify the process as much as possible. So when you purchase a cyber insurance policy, within that policy, you get one phone number to call. So it's very, very important once you have that and it livens up, you've got that insurance in place, you have to hold on to that phone number because ultimately that's going to be your lifeline here. So you call up the line, you make sure that that it's one of the first, or if not the first thing you do, if you suspect something is foul, and then one of the special operators will pick up the phone. And it basically kicks off a bit of a domino effect from their side. And I think the ability to move quickly is absolutely everything. The fact that all these different teams coordinate and sort of work with one another. The first thing which happens in a sort of chronological order is the person takes a call, they then contact the breach response team. Breach responders and digital forensics teams go in together, and they basically would perform what's known as a triage. So triage is where they find the area in which the hacker got in, they try to plug the hole, they lock down on the attack or the script which they've written, they contain it, and make sure that it can't do any more damage. So that's almost like the firefighters going in and then obviously spraying down the house with a hose. So once that's done, it then kicks off a load of other sort of areas. And insurers have kind of looked at the after effects of what happens from a breach perspective. And I think, as we all know, when a breach does happen, it doesn't just affect one area of the business. It affects your operations, it affects your finance, and all sorts of sort of ripples go right the way through the company. So when you look at the after effects, insurers have kind of taken that all into account. So there's legal experts who will fight your corner when it comes to your PR for your company. You'll need to obviously make sure that the ICO is informed that a breach has taken place. Insurers also cover that. And then obviously things like notification services as well. The fact that not only is this attack happened, but there could be potential for a knock-on effect with your customers, right? So it's the ability for them to be contacted at a mass scale to say that, look, this has happened. But this is obviously guided by the legal experts who handle things like this, which happen every single day. And they just make sure that not only has the business contained the threat, but then also it has the ability to try and pick itself up and just have that added level of resilience which you would have to pay an awful lot of money for if you were, as I say, bringing these legitimate experts in individually. So they've almost brought it all under one hat. I think like Craig mentioned at the start of this as well, lots and lots of breaches happen from human error. I think it's 90% or something. So there's a very high amount of breaches which take place via human error. And I think it's very much the responsibility of your broker as well, to kind of guide you. And before you purchase a policy, understand what your policy entails, right? So in plain language, because obviously when you go through the documents and things like that, there's lots of jargon and stuff in there. It's the ability to kind of lay it all out and say, this is what my policy entails. From a broker's perspective, it should be up to them to kind of say, if a phishing attack does happen, we've got the optional add-on of social engineering within your policy. Or if a business email compromise happens, it's also covered. So it's about knowing from the start where you're covered, making sure there's no blind spots. And then if that fateful day does happen, fingers crossed it doesn't, but if you need to, you can call that line up, and then suddenly you've got these experts who will snap into action and fight on your behalf, to make sure that you have the ability to kind of continue from where you left off.
Sounds incredibly valuable. Speaking from experience, but being very careful of what I say, because this was a real company and I know some backstory of what happened. But I've seen this in the past, and we had a real example where there was a hack, and the cost alone, I think, because that company at the time didn't have any cyber insurance, the cost alone of the digital forensics ran into the high 20, low 30,000s, then plus the cost of then remediation of the breach, the PR issue. You mentioned a really good point about them contacting your customers. So again, there's this, I think they now call it double or triple extortion. So it's almost like, right, we'll extort you for the data. Now we're going to phone all the customers that are in that database, or we're going to phone all your suppliers and tell them we've got this data. And so incredibly malicious, very, very dirty. I can truly see the value there in having a kind of a team that can jump in and do that. And I think the PR part's probably slightly undersold or overlooked, because again, probably a few years ago now, we did an event on this, and we did a kind of a bit of a disaster masterclass, and we covered off we had a PR expert in talking about that piece and how you manage that. And actually, it's hugely disruptive. Was at a particular event 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was a group of other IT providers, and one of the guys in the room very candidly was up on stage and said, look, we got hacked, we had a breach, so this is what happened. And we didn't really have a PR plan in place. Everybody was then coming after us. There was just bad news going everywhere. We didn't get on top of that quickly enough to contain that. So I can see that's where, again, there's real value in kind of getting those teams together and kind of hitting the ground and really kind of trying to contain that and nip it in the bud, or at least having money there to remediate some of that stuff and do the mop up afterwards. So
this is it, and I think going back to the breach response services, if my previous company I worked for at an MSP level, they obviously offered that as a service, right? So that was something which they would spin up and activate and make sure that it was something which they could get in the environment as quick as possible and contain the threat. But ultimately, you're pretty much at their mercy when it comes to pricing, because by that point you're in dire need. You're basically in the river and you're waiting for them to kind of throw you a life raft. So what's the alternative? You don't pay the money, and then the damage keeps going on and you get further and further in the hole. So you're getting an insane amount of value, all brought into just one policy. And I think, to kind of go back to what I was saying as well, the fact that they all coordinate and work together is another thing, because it'd be hard enough to kind of bring these companies in individually, but to have them be able to communicate and just know, right, this part of the process has now been done, it's our turn, we go in from here. And so that's pretty much all brought under sort of one umbrella. And I think typically when we think about cyber insurance, it's always financial indemnity, and I think obviously that's a huge part of it, and it acts like a shock absorber for your company, the ability to claim back those funds there. But then also to kind of build on what I was talking about as well, when we look at Jaguar Land Rover, the use of third parties, right? I mean, when you look at supply lines, you look at, okay, I feel pretty good about my cybersecurity, right? I've got a good firewall, my backups are in check. I work very closely with a managed service provider. But can the same be said for the companies to which I rely on when it comes to supply lines and things like that? So again, um, that's basically covered within a cyber insurance policy as well. And whether that be malicious, whether that be something where it's happened just out of pure chance, such as the CrowdStrike update, which was widespread and global. Obviously, there's a huge knock-on effect there, but it wasn't done out of malicious sort of means. It was more just something which went ahead when it probably shouldn't have. So it's that ability, and I think oftentimes that is a blind spot for many companies because they're obviously so focused on okay, making sure that we're all good over here, but can the same be said for the network of companies to which you rely on? So that's another big area as well, and things like um, tabletop exercises or breach response plan. Again, that's a very big area. I can speak to my role at an MSP, and I had a customer who had run a breach response plan or a tabletop exercise, and really kind of go through it and act out what would happen in a real circumstance. And they did that twice a year for about half an hour each time, and they reduced their ability to respond to it in half. So it's things like that which insurers look at and they think that's so important. But the question is if you're going to run something like that, how many people formulate that plan, build it, and do they involve insurers when running the plan? Oftentimes not, right? It's something where they run it internally, they get maybe the head of the company and a few employees together and they all act it out. But are they involving the insurer? And so I've started to see that more. I've started to see companies start to bring in their insurers and almost act out with them, and so they can get a really great simulation of what it will look like in a worst case scenario. So there's lots of inventive ways, I think, which we need to sort of be thinking about because, as we know, the likelihood of attacks is, as I say, if you look at statistics, it's increasing, and it's just making sure that that rigid plan is in place. And then, we all know our role within it. This person's going to contact the hotline, and from there, they can kick things off as quick as possible. So I would say definitely if you're ever doing a breach response plan, involve your insurer. We as the broker can be the conduit. We can kind of sit you down with your broker, actually get to know them, speak to them, speak to the company, understand what it is they're going to do from their side. And because they're obviously an extension of your company and you need to rely on them when you need them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. I see we've got a few questions in, so I'll cover those off in a second. We'll pivot over to those and we'll start to tackle some of those bits and pieces. I just wanted to add a few kind of things that I thought were kind of useful takeaways from just time and experience, really, and having seen where people have gone wrong. So I think, Alex, you touched on a brilliant point around sort of tabletopping and thinking around how you do this. I mean, there are ways to do like you say, a fully managed, fully arranged tabletop. Initially, you can just get the key people together and even just think about what you would do, and actually, again, bit of role playing. It's almost like going back to your childhood, but you start to think, well, let's talk about this. Well, what happens if we can't get hold of that person? What's the next step?
Yeah.
So I think starting off, my tips would be kind of get yourself a basic incident response plan built. I think you need to think about that internally, involve your insurers, involve your IT, but understand kind of who the key points of contact and responsibilities are, but also understand who the decision makers would be if those people are not available, because these things don't often happen at convenient times. If it happens in the middle of the night and you can't raise the CEO or whoever, well, who else has got a decision-making responsibility, if anybody? So mapping all of that out, and then printing it out, and actually printing it out and taking it home and giving it to the key stakeholders so they have a copy of that plan at home. Because again, let's say you have a building access system, your building's compromised, you can't get in, or suddenly you can't get to the plans, or your server's been locked and it was all stored on SharePoint, so you now can't get to the incident response plan. So a physical copy is really good. A couple of other things that I think are really useful that people maybe could think about going away and putting in place would be to pull together a key contact list. So alongside that kind of plan as to maybe who's responsible and what the key steps are. I think having a contact list of like, right, here's the phone number for the insurers, here's their hotline, here's the MSP's phone number, here's the CEO's mobile number, here's all the key contacts and a few different ways of getting hold of them. Just again, have that alongside the plan. Bear in mind it is personally identifiable information, so you just need to protect it a little bit and be careful with it. But it's definitely something to have handy. And then the final thing that I'll add on that is around a point that we discussed when I was at this IT group meeting, and the guy who went through this experience of having his business hacked, we were talking about we sort of pivoted back, and I said, well, years ago I used to do some work for an airfield, and we used to go into the operations room at the airfield, which was basically a couple of people with microphones, like an air traffic control tower. And on the wall they had this piece of paper pinned up, and it said, if we have an incident and somebody phones up from the press and asks us about this, these are our standard lines we're going to say. This is exactly what this is our response. This is our canned response before we've spoken to anybody else, or we've involved insurers, or we've got anything. And I think just thinking about that and having that canned response handy and drilled or available for people is a really useful thing, because in the heat of the moment, let's say you do have a cyber attack, suddenly you've got, I don't know, the Daily Mail are phoning up your office and they've got hold of one of your staff and they're asking them questions about it. Well, what do you want them to say? You need to have control of the narrative. So having that pre-planned as like an emergency statement. I'm not saying you necessarily need to pin it on the wall like they did at the airfield. I can understand why they would do that there, but just having that available and drilled, I think, for people could be a really useful thing. So those are some of my kind of takeaways that I think people could probably go away and work on this week. I think that'd be quite straightforward. Anything you want to add to that, Alex, or should we pivot into questions?
Yeah, no, I think it's similar to what you said there, Craig. I think you just really want to bring in the people who are going to fight your corner, and to actually print off something, a physical copy is so important, because you think, oh, I've got it all stored in the right place, it's going to be great, but then suddenly when you can't get access to it, or I mean, oftentimes we're not at our desks, aren't we? We're maybe on the weekend or out of hours. That's where plenty of attacks happen, and you just want to make sure that you've got everything to hand so that you can get a hold of the people which you need. So I would say I would pretty much just follow on from what you've mentioned there, Craig. But definitely keep a hold of the hotline, and obviously your MSP as well, in the areas which you spend the most time, because you never know what can happen. You just want to make sure that you've got it to hand when you need it.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, let's pivot to some questions. We've got 4 from the audience, and I've got one on my own to start with, so I'm going to be greedy and I'm going to take it because that's my right as the organizer. And this again comes straight to you, Alex. I've got a cyber insurance policy, but how do I actually know if it's any good? Is there a way that I can have that kind of eyeballed by somebody else? I mean, maybe yourselves or somebody that goes like, do you know what, that's perfect and it covers everything, or you've got some real gaps in that coverage?
Yeah, so this is something which I've been performing a lot recently, and it's pretty much, look, I've bought cyber insurance, but I'll be completely honest, I bought it as a tick box exercise. I just know that I needed to have it, right? So, and oftentimes maybe it's their first year of having it, or a couple of years, and they don't really know necessarily what good looks like. I've been performing what you would call a silent review, and that's basically, it's silent because it's completely, confidential. We won't tell anyone. All we will do is go straight to insurers. There's no one else outside of that other than ourselves, yourself, and then the insurer. And from there, we would look to almost like bench test your policy and make sure that it's fit for your business. And this is something which I'm finding huge sort of gaps in at the moment. And the reason I say that is because when we look at businesses who've got cyber insurance in the US, it's prolific. Lots and lots of companies have cyber insurance in place. We seem to be a little bit behind them. But I would say 50% of businesses probably have some form of cyber insurance in place. But the biggest issue is it's bundled into a generalist policy. And that covers all sorts of other areas that are sort of commercial combined and things like that. And so I think it's less than 3%, just under 3% of businesses in the UK actually have a standalone cybersecurity policy. The reason I say that, I've sort of drawn attention to that today, is because like I've mentioned, the leading cause of breaches tends to be phishing attacks, business email compromise, and social engineering is the part of a policy which looks after those areas. And oftentimes it's optional. It's an optional add-on. So it's something where I will always go out to my clients and recommend for them to have it, because of obviously it being so rife. And I think it'd be crazy to go in there and say, yes, we cover for ransomware attacks, but not for phishing and not for some of these areas. That's my security background anyway, and I think when we look at who needs to kind of have that conversation with you to make sure that you've got what you need, that's entirely, in my opinion, up to the broker. As much as Craig, I'm sure that you work closely with many businesses, advise them what they need to kind of help them build a cybersecurity posture. It's very much the job of a broker to kind of lead the client through the like fine sort of print of the policy and make sure that it does what it says and holds up to the light of day when you need it. So that's what I'd recommend. Sit down for a silent review with your broker or a broker which is of your choosing, and then get them to kind of spell out in plain language what it covers, your indemnity periods, various different sort of things, and maybe just get on a call with them, have a frank conversation, and just say, look, I'm not an insurance person, but I just need to understand how this all looks. So that's my recommendation. See if you can arrange something like that, and I'm sure they would be happy to do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. Cool. Right. Let's tackle some user Q&A. And I should just caveat as well, by the way, we have no kind of introducer agreement with Alex. There's nothing. There's no skin in the game for OneFix on Alex looking at anything that you may have policy wise. It's purely that we would really like to see that cyber hygiene of our clients increase, and actually something that we're going to focus on in terms of understanding that cyber posture for the clients a little bit better going forward. So just putting that out there. We're not benefiting in any way, shape, or form from Alex getting loads of business off the back of this, other than he might buy me a drink. Right, Peter Cowan, should we use passkeys instead of passwords? Very practical piece. Yeah, passkeys are absolutely a level above passwords. So yes, where you have the option to do that, they're great. There's a few technical caveats around that. I think it's something we can cover off separately, but essentially the one thing I would say with passkeys is that you do have challenges with transferring them, and you shouldn't share passwords, but if you're using something like a password manager, you can move those passwords from key employees if they leave the business and move them to somebody else. Keeper, which is the premium password manager that we do recommend to people, does have the ability to store and move passkeys around. So I think they're great. So yes, as a whole, if you're using them personally, 100%. If you're using them in the business, I think it's just understanding holistically for the business, is it okay to do that? Can they be moved around? And that's probably an internal decision as to, if you let everybody use passkeys and the key employee leaves, you're probably going to find you can't get any access to what they had access to. So just some thoughts around it. But yeah, absolutely, passkeys will make you safer. And potentially, I don't know if it's a question on the cyber risk side of things yet, but all of these kind of controls, they are called controls. They will theoretically all help to chip away at reducing your premium or certainly reducing your risk posture. So great question. Thank you. That's good. One from a non-attendee of the webinar, and I'll let Alex answer this one. Do we call OneFix or do we call our insurer first?
Good question. I mean, I would definitely recommend getting on the hotline probably first. I would say let's kick that process off, get that well and done as soon as possible. But what insurers also want to see is that you have a firm relationship with an MSP. They want to make sure that you've got someone who's an expert in that field when it comes to cybersecurity. And I've seen scenarios where an insurer has come in after an MSP has completely triaged an event, and dust their hands off and say it's all sorted now. And I've seen scenarios where they go, that doesn't invalidate your policy by any means, and if anything, they're glad that you came in and you've sorted it, right? So I would say definitely get on with the hotline. Definitely contact OneFix as well. Make them aware that something has happened, because as you're their provider, they will be able to help you along this process, and have almost like a two-pronged approach. And that's what I would personally recommend.
Thanks, Alex. I'll completely agree. Thank you. Another one from Peter. Thanks, Peter. Do OneFix perform penetration tests as part of their standard service? Great question. No, we don't. And the reason we don't is because they are incredibly bespoke. Penetration tests are kind of priced out on a whole scope of engagement. So we use a third party. It's in fact the third party that Alex and I, we met at an event that third party were running, a company called Digital X-Raid. We typically work with them for penetration tests. They've just completed our one internally. because what a penetration test can be is it could be scoped to be an internal test, so of your internal network. It could be an external test to come into the network. It could be a test of your applications. And then typically they're priced on the number of devices that you've got and a scope of engagement. So that provider will look at it and go, for example, here at OneFix, we 20 odd devices, external network, it's a couple of days of work and they're going to sit there and just try and break in. So they are very different to sort of like a vulnerability scan, and we do some vulnerability scanning as part of what we provide, but penetration testing is a little bit niche, a little bit special. Fully, if there's scope and you're interested to do that, definitely recommend that you consider it. If you reach out to Callum, the account manager, he will be able to kind of start an engagement there with no cost up front to go and find out what that looks like and scope out how that looks for the business and what the price is, because it is very dependent, say, on number of devices, number of servers, how many external IPs there are. It gets very technical, but incredibly valuable because it will highlight not just issues with particular IT security, but also around other devices on the network, things that we don't particularly manage. So you might get pings coming up for certain phones and devices that you just didn't realize were, there's an old phone sitting in the corner that's running an old firmware and it happens to be vulnerable. There's no way that that would have been picked up without that kind of test. So they're brilliant, they're very valuable. They're not the cheapest thing in the world. I'll put that out there. So but I think they're a good investment. And again, I think Alex can nod his head on this one, but again, if you tick a box to say you're doing penetration testing, I would seriously expect your cyber insurance risk and premium should drop for that. So
yeah, it's one of those key areas, Craig. It's one of those key areas. It's something which insurers are looking for, alongside your backups, like I mentioned earlier, making sure that you've got a good managed service provider which you work with, and then multi-factor authentication. So I'd say an annual pen test is very much the bedrock of what an insurer is typically looking for. So that's obviously another driver or another reason to get a penetration test in the first place, I would say.
fabulous. Thank you, Alex. And last question, and it's sort of perfectly timed actually, because it pretty much brings us towards wrap up, which is great. So we're on time. Question from Julian. Hi, Julian. How do we formulate breach response plans? Can OneFix help with that, or should we speak to our insurers? Yeah, we definitely can help. And actually, thank you, Julian. You've given me a fantastic idea for another tool that we can build for our website. We have a resources area. We've built out things like an acceptable use of AI policy builder. I think an incident breach response plan builder would be a brilliant thing to build. So keep your eyes peeled. I'll get that sent out to everybody shortly once we've got that built out. But we can definitely help with that. So do engage us in that process. But I think it's very important to not purely just focus on IT. That's the one thing I do find important, because often with all these things, because it can get so technical, everybody goes, that's just an IT problem. And actually these things are not just an IT problem. It's a security, obviously cybersecurity is slightly more of an IT problem, but a general breach and incident security is a business-wide thing. So I think it's really important to involve all the different areas of the business and look at that. But we can certainly help from the IT aspect. So thank you for asking. Again, reach out to Callum on the account management side of things. I'm sure he can provide some information. We do also have the ability to give you some kind of pre-built template policies. I think we'll build our own builder for that, but the pre-built ones are useful as a starting point. The key there is, again, understanding what you've got and what the risks are, and who the people are to contact. So yes, happy to help with that. So pretty much brings us time. A couple of minutes left. Alex, have you got anything more you would like to kind of add? I think it would be useful to maybe let people know how they can reach out to you if they do want to take advantage of the a bit of a silent review, as you called it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am obviously on LinkedIn. So Alex Sampson's the name. Work at New Dawn Risk. So please feel free to reach out to us. If it's something where you want to kind of demystify cyber insurance, just have an initial chat, understand what it looks like, and get you some recommendations and maybe potentially some pricing, just kind of understand how affordable it is. We are absolutely here for that. Outside of that, feel free to reach out to me via email, or just give us a call on the line, and someone in the team will pick this up, and we can absolutely sort of run from it from there. So happy to help. And if there's sort of any questions or anything which you maybe think about after this session today, and you kind of kick yourself and think, oh, I should have said something, please feel free just to kind of reach out to me on LinkedIn or whatever that may be, and just fire a quick question, because I'm always here to kind of give a bit more of an idea as to how it will look for your particular organization.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. And I'm sure Jess will pop something around on email as well to everybody that's been attended and registered to to send your details around and all that information. So the final thing I'll close out with, I think, is the thing that I always think is just crazy, is that none of us as business owners would ever not consider insuring against fire, flood, or theft, but many people would not always consider insuring against cyber insurance, and I think against cyber threats. And I think realistically, the risk of a cyber threat, in my mind, is probably more likely than the building catching fire or flooding. I may be wrong. I hope I'm not proved right, but I think do really consider, if you don't have cyber insurance in place, at least drop Alex a line, get yourself a quote. There's lots of ways to look at that. Drop us a line if you need any help with controls and how you might control your stuff around the policies. But Alex, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for giving up 45 minutes of your day. Thank you to everybody who's attended, and we'll see you on the next one very soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.